Today, we learned new details about the Trump family's involvement in the effort to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. According to the charges filed against former Trump fixer Michael Cohen by the special counsel today, Cohen, briefed family members of Individual One, that's the president, within the company about the project in Moscow. Now, that's especially interesting considering what the president's son and top Trump Organization official, Donald Trump Jr., told the Senate Intelligence Committee in September 2017. Trump Jr. said he knew, quote, very little about the Trump Tower Moscow deal, and he wasn't involved. I'm joined now by Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, member of the House Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee, which also interviewed Donald Trump Jr. and Michael Cohen about Russian contacts last year. Congressman, did they tell you the truth?
I don't think they did, Chris, and we've had this concern for a long time, and I think that Mueller actually could have reached this plea today much earlier had Chairman Nunes and the Republicans allowed us to send over to the Mueller team our transcripts. We have in the basement of the Capitol pages of lies of Trump campaign witnesses and their transcripts. They came to us, and those witnesses and their transcripts sit in the Capitol protected by Chairman Nunes, and I think that is delaying the Mueller investigation.
Wait a second. I knew, I was operating in the knowledge that the Senate transcripts had made public and yours had not, but I just figured they'd been shared with Mueller, even if they hadn't been made public. No. You're saying Mueller hasn't seen them?
He has not seen any of our transcripts, with the exception of Carter Page's and also Eric Prince's, because they asked for them to be released. But Roger Stone, for example, who did not testify to the Senate, his transcript sits locked up in our basement. And we have tried, Mr. Schiff has asked a number of times, he's made motions to send those transcripts to the special counsel because we have concerns about the veracity of the statements, and Devin Nunes has blocked it each and every time.
Did you guys ask them in those hearings? Did you ask Michael Cohen and Don Jr. about Trump Tower Moscow?
So, Chris, I've honored the agreement that I'm not going to talk about it until it becomes public, but you can be assured that it was a thorough examination, and that's why we wanted those transcripts first to go to Mueller and also, as soon as possible, to go to the American people.
So you're going to get the gavel in a matter of weeks, I guess, at this point.
I think it's 34 days, yeah.
Okay, well, you're who's counting? Right, yeah. Exactly. Not fun to be in the minority in the House. So what are you going to do?
Well, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to send those transcripts over to Mueller. We're going to make sure they're seen by the American people in short order as well. But most importantly, we're going to follow the money. We wanted to look at the money laundering issues for a long time, particularly with Deutsche Bank, particularly with bank records that would never be subpoenaed and bank witnesses that we could have brought in. So we will first, answer those questions. But also, as it relates to the Trump Tower meeting, we will know what knowledge Donald Trump had, because there are a lot of gaps that the Republicans would not let us fill in, particularly around who Donald Trump Jr. was talking to on the phone or messaging at the time that the meeting was set up.
There's a report in Politico today that the Democrats think Michael Cohen, could be a linchpin in their upcoming efforts to spotlight the president's relationship with Russia, are hoping to call him to testify before the House once they seize control of Congress. What do you think of that?
Well, few witnesses lived in all three of Donald Trump's worlds, his political world, his financial world, and his personal world. And Michael Cohen lived in all three. And now that he has come clean and come forward, I think he could shed light on what we all would like to know, which was what was candidate Trump's knowledge, what actions did he direct others to do, and whether or not he today, as president of the United States, is compromised.
What do you think about pleading to lying to Congress and what legal exposure that might open up for other people?
It should send a message that it will be prosecuted. And as I said, there are a lot of witnesses who came in and we don't think were straight with us, but we weren't allowed to test their testimony or to contradict it or collaborate. So I hope that when that's sent to Bob Mueller, that he does hold those individuals accountable, and that when people come forward in this new investigation, that they come clean, because there's really no way around the MRI that Bob Mueller and his team will take to the truth.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you for joining me. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.